Hello and welcome to the Serious Games Podcast, all about playful methods for interactive trainings and facilitation. Let's get started. And welcome back to the Serious Games Podcast. Today, I am connected to Copenhagen in Denmark, obviously. I'm connected with Per Kristiansen. Oh, wow. We've met 2013. That is 8 years ago, when I was trained by you in the LEGO Serious Play method. Per is the co-founder of the Association of Master Trainers in the LEGO Serious Play method and the consultancy Trivium. But Per, before I read everything that you've done, could you just introduce yourself? Welcome to the podcast, and then let's talk about LEGO Serious Play today.
Hi, Julian. It's good to be with you. I think you did it. I think you did really well. So yeah, I am a partner in Trivium, and we are based in Copenhagen, and I am a co-founder of this association. and maybe I've been working with and on with Serious Play for I guess 20 years. So which I think is why we're sitting here as well.
Absolutely. So early adopter. In fact, you co-developed parts of the method. We'll talk about that later, because what I really want our listeners to get a feeling for, okay, not everyone has been in a LEGO Serious Play session or workshop, so maybe we can do two parts in this podcast. Number one, look at just one topic that you can tackle with the method, and then let's talk a little bit about, where did it come from, and where the magic happens, and how, if it can be applied in virtual setups, etc. So, how would you describe LEGO Serious Play to someone who never even heard about LEGO Serious Play?
First of all, I think I would probably try not to describe it. I would put on a mask and go to somewhere where there are not tough restrictions, and I would take out my Lego bricks and I would demonstrate it to them.
Yeah,
I'll get to it, but I want to use a metaphor first. Sometimes describing what LEGO Serious Play is like describing downhill skiing. It doesn't really make sense to describe it. You cannot really convey the feeling or the flow experience you have, or the just pure joy when you have it. So that was my honest answer. Or maybe I would get the vaccine real fast and go to see someone. If I was cornered and had to do it on a Zoom call, I might actually try to go back to a quote, or at least paraphrasing a quote from the owner of Lego, of the Lego company, because all of this started with him. And Kjell Kirk is his name. Kjell Kirk has always seen the Lego brick as a language. It was not a toy. It was a language. It was a language that children spoke between each other when they were playing. They spoke it to develop themselves, their skills, their social, their cognitive skills. And then what he said back then was, when this was being developed, now finally it was developed into a language that could be brought into boardrooms. So in that sense, it's really a language that adults in organizations in the boardroom, that's where it started, can speak when they're trying to solve a complex issue or want to develop a unique solution, because it's also a language which is spoken between the brain cells. It's almost like saying that language now is becoming complicated. That language starts inside the head and then becomes a language between us. So you can actually you can use this language for any complex issue. And now let's go to what we do, or what I do in Trivium, which is sort of let's call it client-facing or consulting arm.
Okay.
We use it a lot for what we might label complex issues. So we use it in developing new value propositions, new business models, when there are mergers inside or between organizations, and we do it a lot in strategy development. So figuring out or diagnosing. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's zoom into one of those examples in a second. But I think that's also, and thanks for bringing up the metaphor of the quote of the language. That's probably also why the answer to the question, what can the LEGO Serious Play method be used for, is so unsatisfying, right?
It's like asking, what can we talk about? Everything.
What can you use stickies for? Well, there are lots
Yeah.
of things that you can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. So,
But maybe,
mhm,
sorry to interrupt
please.
you. I think there's one thing I would say that, sometimes with questions like this, it's almost easy to say, what shouldn't it be used for?
Mm,
And it shouldn't be used for communicating what someone else already knows.
yes.
So this is for thinking. It's not for imposing someone's answer. So maybe the answer to your question is more like, well, there are things it shouldn't be used for.
Okay, good. And now you said you and your team at Trivium, you're using it for complex issues, strategy development,
Yes.
future scenarios, etc.
Yes.
Um, Maybe we can just give our listeners a short, like, look and feel of such a workshop or
Yeah.
a session, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you're vaccinated and everyone is vaccinated, or there's no pandemic, and let's use an example from the last years. So let's say you would have a workshop
Mhm.
next week. What would you need to prepare or know about the team, their issues, the company,
Yeah.
their problems, and how and what
Yeah.
they did in the
No.
past?
Yeah. So if we take a strictly facilitative approach, which we tend to do, we as facilitators basically need to be sufficiently ignorant. That means what we really know
Mhm.
is what to ask and how to ask.
Mm.
So to a degree, or let's just speak as a first
Mhm.
person, I don't need to know a lot
Mhm.
about the individuals. I don't need to
Mhm.
know a lot about the company,
Mhm.
because when we do that, we tend to project our assumptions about the answer onto them. So we end up almost like manipulating them to an answer which they don't fully
Mm.
own them.
Mm.
Now, of course, we need to know something. We need to know something about strategy. We need to be able to speak their language. That's why I say sufficiently ignorant, because
Mm.
then the approach we take to it is that we use the series play LSP to
Mm.
help them think, right, and to
Mhm.
help them communicate this. So we would typically, all things equal, we will typically go in and use the series play for them to do a diagnosis first. And when I
Mm.
say diagnosis, I mean sort of first step of the workshop is a lot about them diagnosing their current state.
Mhm. Mhm.
So who are we today? Whichever that we is. It could be a department, a business unit, a startup,
Right.
so forth and so on. So really sort of saying, okay, who are we?
Mm.
Positive and negative. It's a
Mhm.
brutally honest version of that.
Mhm.
And that's because we come from a perspective when we speak strategy about, we start from the resources,
Mm.
not so much from the external world, and other people have a different approach and so forth and so on.
Mhm. Mhm.
Then we'll typically start diagnosing the landscape.
Okay, hold on. Now, look, Per, you're using lots of Lego
I
series
know,
play
I'm sorry.
language already. That's a natural language for us, I would say these days. But
Geeks.
let's roll back just a little bit.
Yeah.
So you were hired. You're in the room. Of course, there are some Lego bricks. We're gonna get into the
Yeah,
details of
yeah,
the
yeah,
material
yeah.
later.
Yep.
Now, how does this diagnosis work?
Okay,
I mean,
fair enough.
yeah, you're
No, no,
sitting down. Of course, there's a welcoming, and then what do? Do you explain where the method comes from,
nope.
and that this is a language, or
Yep.
what do you do? How does it really feel firsthand for a participant in that workshop?
Yeah. Thank you, Junior. Getting me back to basics. No, it's really good. So yeah, let's picture this. First of all, we
Yes.
tend not to be more than 12 people.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That does mean we can't be more than 12 people. But
Mm-hmm.
now we're talking strategy,
Yeah.
a workshop, and then we typically want a smaller group to create lots of time and space for people.
Yes.
We don't talk a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Do now maybe, but not in a workshop. In
Okay.
a workshop, it's actually about getting started,
Right.
because let me park the getting started for a second, but
Mm-hmm.
then the why getting started.
Mm.
They don't care where this comes from,
Yep.
and it makes no difference to them. And the more I would talk, or the CEO would talk, the more this feels like any other meeting. So let's get started. We didn't start this podcast by you explaining to me who created that microphone of yours. Why does the noise reduction work so well?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter to me, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we actually get started really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a language, as I said, or we can call it a method, but let's stick with the language. When you need to use a language on a difficult manner, first you need to learn the grammar or the syntax of the language.
Yeah.
So we spend a little bit of time just
Mm.
getting to understand that.
Mm.
Right. So just getting into the language, realizing, oh, I can build with a Lego brick. It doesn't mean
Mm.
which bricks I choose. It matters what they mean. When I share my story, which they do,
Mm-hmm.
people will listen to me. So
Mm-hmm.
getting into that one. So and that might take an hour. It's the best investment ever,
Mm.
but it might take an hour. This is like a metaphor here could be like a 100-meter sprint, right? They warm up an hour to run for 10 seconds.
Yeah. And by that learning the language, like by that first hour, I mean, of course, you already ask the questions about the complex issue? Of course not, right? You would start with
Correct. Flat,
simple,
simpler
personal,
things. Yeah.
yeah, simpler thing. Okay. Mm-hmm. Do you have an
Um,
example for that? Like, what is your favorite, startup question?
Before I start, so we typically start with three. It's three exercises we start with,
Yes.
and one of them is so simple that it's really just about reconnecting with the Lego brick. So let's
Yes.
forget about that one. And then we do a little bit of an exercise, which is really about getting in there
Mm.
and realizing and being intentional about the metaphors that we use. And we all use
Yes.
metaphors all the time.
Sure.
And then we do this what we call a story making exercise, which really helps people to start building things that they didn't know they know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is
Mm-hmm.
something I didn't know I knew that. So we tap into all the stuff that the individuals don't know that they know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the potential knowledge, if I may call it that. There's a lot of cool ones there. And here we tend to go extreme, like the nightmare version of a given thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Okay.
are just fun. They're
Yeah.
fun, and fun is a serious matter, right? But
Right.
we're building things like a nightmare competitor, a nightmare consultant, a nightmare
Mm-hmm.
politician, and it's actually a really nice moment because
Mm-hmm.
these models are very imaginative and they're
Mm.
lots of fun. There's lots of truth in them. It
Uh-huh.
is also typically the moment where many realize that, oh,
Mm.
this does something to my thinking.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this does something to how people are listening to my thinking.
Mm. Mm.
And so in that sense, that's a really nice moment. You almost sense like a shift in the room.
Mm. Yeah.
You
And
don't
and
say that because then the magic is gone, right?
right, right. And you just mentioned it shortly.
Hmm.
Imagining 12 people in the room,
Hmm.
everyone is, going through this getting to know the new language activities, and
Hmm.
then they're talking about
Yep.
what they've built and created, as you mentioned, for example, a nightmare competitor. So one person is explaining, sharing,
Yep.
storytelling,
Yep.
story making,
Yep.
and all the others, including you, are
Yep.
listening, right?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So that's why maybe our listeners can sense already like a difference from the
Yeah.
meetings or the workshop that they're or the workshop sessions or partner sequences that they're normally in.
Yep. Yeah. So we
Okay.
typically, if I can just build on that one, Julian, because we do make a big thing about talking about 100, 100.
Mm-hmm.
This notion now that these are 100, 100. Let's call them meetings, right?
Yeah.
Where everyone is
Mm-hmm.
involved all the time, right? That's one part of the 100, 100. So you are involved when you're building,
Mm-hmm.
but you're also involved when you're listening.
Yes.
So everybody's always engaged in the process. We also another aspect to the 100, 100 is that every person unlocks their full potential. So it's almost like saying there's an internal 100, 100,
Mm-hmm.
or intra. Let's call it intra-personal
Uh-huh.
100,
Yeah.
100,
Mm-hmm.
and there's an interpersonal 100, 100 actually going on.
Okay.
Maybe we should just circle back and then get rid of this strategy workshop. But
Yeah,
imagine that
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
when people then when they now know this, right? Then the first step could be, or for us typically is that they build the identity
Okay.
of whatever constituency we are making a strategy. They are making a strategy for. So
Mm-hmm.
if we were doing it for a department, they would
Mm-hmm.
build the identity of the department. And the
Wow.
identity, it can really cover a lot of things. It could be their competences, it could be their current value proposition, it could be their cultural values, it could, capabilities, anything that they sense, their sense of purpose and mission, right? Just all of that thing that we as an entity are today. And when they get that, and they always start from building individual models, because what Julian think we are is equally true as what Georgina thinks,
Yep,
right?
there you go.
And,
Yep.
and then we move to that shared model, and then we go for this landscape thing, as I called it, which is any outside factor. This could be where they're building their competitors and their clients and certain providers, the government, the whatever they think exists in that landscape. And landscape is just a metaphor, right? It's not a landscape, but the market is just a metaphor, right?
Okay.
So a landscape is a market, is an external world, is your environment, whatever metaphor, whatever label you attach to it, right?
Okay. Wow.
And then from then you work on it.
I really have the feeling that I need to put the Lego Series Play language and the steps also in the show notes and in the marks of the episode, just so we get it straight, okay? Because you were talking about, of course, individual models. I build a model. I get to share what it means to me. Everyone else gets to listen. And yes, they, of course, also get to ask some questions about the model, right?
Yes.
To clarify. Okay, then we have a shared model,
Yep.
which means 12 people agree on one single model as the answer to the question that you have posed, or let's stick just with the identity. Okay, what's
Yep.
the identity of this department or team? And that's one model, one answer. And just to clarify, more than one person will then explain what that model means to
Typically.
the group, right?
Typically.
And I think that's also, maybe we're just going back to how the method works later on, but this is also a magical moment for me when we have to agree on what this model means, and not only what it means, but also how we phrase it, right?
Yeah.
So now we really have a shared language, then, right?
Yeah, that's a powerful moment, and I know you know this, but it's also the process of creating this shared model can take a long time, and we always dive into the theories and all that later. But there is something about this being together, this interacting over the boundary object, and touching things and moving around things, and
Yeah.
I mean, embodied cognition, constructionism, whatever you want to call it, but there's a lot of things going on there, and just interacting in that way creates a pretty deep commitment to the model. Now, it really does, and I remember a client session where I was back to them a year later after our first strategy session, and they had merged with another division, and the VP or executive VP that I was working with, he became the EVP of this newly formed division, right? Leadership was probably 60-40 new, old and new, right? So I came in there, and we're going to start a new strategy process, and I was looking at that. Like they bought the materials, and you don't necessarily have to buy the materials, but these guys had, because they were using it frequently.
Oh, okay.
So I came in there and I was looking at these boxes, and when you've done this a long time, you know the bricks that are supposed to be there. And I was looking at this, I'm saying, but some of these bricks is this everything? And it's no, but we still have the old identity and vision models. And I was like, what? Yeah, but that's no good, right? We're supposed to do something new here, right? And you want this new team to feel part of the leadership team. Yeah, but we really don't want to ruin it, and it really means, and it really matters, and they owned it. The commitment to those models were so high, they wouldn't even want to break them when we're doing this new version. I mean, obviously, I had to break them. No, I didn't. They did, of course, right? But we I'm not even joking here. We recorded the employee when she was walking from her office to the workshop room where where they had to take it apart, because they had to have this goodbye recording for eternity. So there's a really I don't know,
Yeah.
strong or beautiful ownership to the model.
Yeah, and it matters, right? More than
It matters.
and that's for me more than any written words or drawings or collages that we've made. It's powerful. But before we again get into
Yeah.
details and the
Yes.
theory behind, look, you mentioned just shortly again, this can take a lot of time. I mean, are
Yeah.
we talking about half a day or two
So the
hours, or is
actual
there a rule of thumb,
shared
of course, on it?
so the shared model building, as we call it, it's really hard to
Yeah.
answer, Julian, because it depends a little bit on what they're creating a shared model of.
Mm-hmm.
The because the more emotionally demanding it is, the longer it takes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You say rule of thumb, and all things equal,
Yeah.
it in an hour or so you can have a nice shared model, but it's very intense.
Mm-hmm.
I could give you the most crazy thing I've ever heard of, which was 2 days.
Yeah.
I didn't do the workshop. One of my good
Mm-hmm.
colleagues in Trivium did, and maybe just closing that's a mad one, right? So it's
Yeah.
a crazy one. But one thing, Julian,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
because the thing was, my
Mm-hmm.
my partner in Trivium at that time, it took them. I mean, literally, it took them 2 days, right? And he was devastated as a facilitator. He thought he had failed. He really thought he had failed. It took them 2 days, right? The rest of the workshop never happened. The
Right.
client was over the moon.
Mm-hmm.
They were so happy because in their mind, in only 2 days, they had managed to do something they hadn't been able to do the previous 18 months. So he was like, it took 2 days. God, no, I'm another disaster. And the client, the participant were like, fantastic, we did it in 2 days, which we couldn't do in 18 months. So it's all about perspective, right?
Absolutely. And I think that is very important for our listeners to sense and also understand that what is part of the Lego Serious Play method, and of course the material, our bricks, right? But then also what type of conversations, change, or as you phrase it, intra or interpersonal dynamics will you spark with that, right? And yeah, as you mentioned, sometimes, thinking about if you haven't managed to come to this commitment, shared understanding of identity within the last years, 2 days is still a rather good time on
Yeah,
this, right?
it is.
And of course, anything between, if you're working with startups, if you're working with a new department, if you're working with, as you also shared, a department that already had or has a strong identity,
And less
and then
conflict, right?
especially, yeah, and of course, there's conflict, the mergers, the
Yeah.
integration of new team members, of new processes, and again, that's where then the conversation and maybe the challenging parts of that method and process happen. But let's move on to
Yes.
the landscape. This is another thing that you mentioned: the landscape, the market, the environment, the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
So there's this one model now as a
Mm-hmm.
metaphor
Mm-hmm.
for the, let's say, identity.
Mm-hmm.
Where
Mm-hmm.
are we now?
Mm-hmm.
And what is this market then?
Yeah. So the belief here, right? Both in Trim, you can say, but also all the way back to where how this started inside Lego is, of course, this notion that we exist in research might call complex adaptive system, right? So we have all of these things out there which are impacting each other, they're impacting us, so forth and so on. So we need to understand them,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to understand, let's say, the relations between them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and each person, they know things that others don't know. And not only do they know things they know, but they also know things that other people don't know they know. There's
Mm-hmm.
all of this stuff. So by allowing them to build whatever, let's just call it agent, that's another tricky word, but it could be a stakeholder, or sometimes you only build clients, for example, to do a client mapping, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then they build that. So again, they build a metaphorical representation of this agent, of this stakeholder, this client, with the characteristics of that. Let's call it the client. It could be the client's needs and the client's dreams and their skills and their competences and their value set. What is leadership for this? So we're starting with understanding the client, the agent, which in itself is valuable. If I'm the builder, I now all of a sudden realize what I know about this client. You didn't know I knew all of this stuff. Maybe you're working with other clients. Maybe you're the CFO, so you're not client facing in the first place. So now you know this stuff. Now, this in itself is not enough. It's a good thing to know. So now we start sort of, let's say, playing. We start playing with the placing of this model. So we now place it in relation to the identity model. Are they close to us right now? Physically, literally distance, right? And what does it mean that they're close to us? Are they close to this corner or to that corner? Are they far away from us? And if so, what does that mean? So that placing starts to mean something. So we're really using the space. So even space means something now. It could also be that the client, if it's a client, is turning in a certain way, right? So they're actually close to us, but looking away from us because, Georgina from before, she built an attractive competitor who's over in that corner of the table. So the client is close to us, but they're looking towards the competitor. Now, what does that mean for us? Okay. So we started to create all of this, or unlock, if you want, knowledge through the building and through the placing.
Okay. All right. So in my imagination, but also in my memory, of course, we have let's say maybe a larger identity model on the table, and then we have smaller agents or customers or values models on the table. Again, still in the same mode, right? We build, we share, we listen, we ask questions, and then we do exactly the same with the placement then, right? We place it there, and we move it around, etc. Okay, now, look, you were talking a lot about, unlocking the knowledge. Do you somehow invite or prepare participants when you invite them to such a workshop to look at the clients or to analyze something in advance or to bring something, do some warm-up activities? Or do you just trust that in that very moment, in that very mode, energy, stance that they're in, that this is the full answer or correct answer or best answer? Or how do you deal with that?
Typically, yes. What I mean is we typically don't ask them to prepare because they know. They know so much. And what they know, they've shared. No, rephrase that. Some of what they know, the thing that they know, they've shared before, right? And people have heard it a million times. And so the more we, all things equal, ask them to prepare, they will be saying what they've always said. They might to a degree say what they think is supposed to be said. And they will use, bear with me here, but bullshit bingo language. I did business school. I can also do all those words, right?
Sure.
It's all that other stuff that they know that we want to get out.
Okay. Yeah.
For the stuff that we know, and the stuff that we could prepare from home, we can do nice PowerPoints and we can stay on Zoom. It's the other stuff. And people know so much. And it is, I would like to do a circle back a little bit to why always starting from the individual, right?
Okay.
We can anchor that in theory if we want to, but I'd rather sort of actually come back to the owner of Lego. Because one of these key beliefs when this got started was this notion that people know more than they know, and every person knows something that other people don't know, and every person knows part of the answer that we need to hear. They know, we know it. People know stuff. The problem is not data, it's making it into knowledge and sharing in a way so that it's heard by others.
Okay. All right. And still imagining the identity model, the agents, again, value, right? And when does it end? I mean, how do you debrief
when
that?
Does it
and how
end?
do you transform all those conversations that were going on, all this knowledge that we now
So
added to the conversation. I mean, is that recorded? Do you
yeah,
write lots of whiteboards? And how do you make sure that a group, a team, acts
yeah,
upon what they
yeah,
know?
yeah. So I'd like to sort of take out a word of
Mhm.
your question to me there, which was debrief, and let's call it
Mhm.
document instead.
Okay, yeah. Mhm.
Because and in our language, I know language is a weird thing, but to me, a
Mhm.
debrief is when we are reflecting on what others did and we explain, almost like explaining to them what they did and
Yeah.
what the
Mhm.
result was.
True, true.
And you don't in serious play,
Okay.
because in serious play the answer is on the table. It's been built.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
the facilitator doesn't have to do much in terms of debriefing or summing up because they know they built it.
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
here, so the workshop, let's just kind of pause on the workshop here because it might not be done yet, right? So
Mhm.
there's lots of things you can do, but let's imagine that we are running out of time in our workshop.
Mhm.
We're looking at this landscape. They made this analysis of their market,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So they know who they are, their purpose, blah, blah, blah. They know the clients, the competitors, maybe the trends, maybe the suppliers, maybe
Mhm.
blah blah. And then they might build a vision. So considering
Okay.
this, who do we want to become,
Mhm.
right? So now you know who you are, you know
Mhm.
where you are, you can see the spaces that are in that market, and you
Mhm.
have your vision for who you want to become, right? Boom.
Okay. Mhm. Yeah.
So now we are becoming to the end of the workshop.
Mm.
So here then, depending on the client's, um, let's say maybe existing definition or template for strategy, from now we might want to start saying, okay, so maybe what they want to identify is customers to focus on. Maybe they
Mm.
want to identify the competencies they now have to build. Maybe they want to identify focus areas. Maybe they want to identify action points. And that
Mhm.
could then be a closing building exercise.
Okay. Yeah. Mhm.
And
Understand.
then say the facilitator, typically we literally record the stories
Sure. Sure. Mhm.
of the core, the diagnosis,
Mm.
of the market, the landscape, the
Mhm.
diagnosis, of the vision, the vision, right?
Mm.
And the actions. This can then be carried into work
Mm.
either simply as these recordings.
Mm.
Now, lots of organizations require a physical written document,
Right.
but it's pretty easy to translate
Mhm.
these recordings into the document because you have the strength. Let's say it's a SWOT, right? You have the strengths there, you have the weaknesses there, you have the threats, you have the opportunities. That can be done by the facilitator, not typically, but it can,
Mhm.
by the
Mm.
client,
Mhm.
or in some sort of collaboration. And then it becomes sometimes a pretty classical document, strategy
Okay.
document.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Mhm.
tend to encourage them a lot to carry the
Mm.
metaphors into the document
Mhm.
because the metaphors carry that emotional commitment.
Mm.
So there is a depth in that, and a commitment to execution in that, which disappears if you turn the particular
Mhm.
metaphor
Yeah.
into a business lingo statement.
Right.
So we
Right.
try to. I remember like people were
Mm.
they wanted to build a brew bridge, right? For you and me, that doesn't mean anything, but for them,
Mm.
it was an action that they were really committed to. They
Mm.
really,
Mm.
I mean, draining the swamp now means something different
Uh,
things to a, but this was also in a core identity
mhm.
in a department in a pharma company some years back, and for them it was very clear what it meant.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is so these
Mm.
metaphors are really powerful.
Okay.
Help them and
Okay.
carry them over into the work. And for us, sorry for going on a rant here, but it's really important that we see play as equally important as work. Right, work
Mhm.
is where you implement decisions.
Mm.
Play is where you explore and experiment
Mm.
in order to develop what you want to implement.
Mhm.
So strategy is a great example of play. When we make a strategy, we're actually not work or we're not implementing, right? We're imagining where we want to
Mm.
focus and all this stuff, right? The work is when we take those and implement them.
Mhm. All right. Let's say that is then the workshop. Okay. Again, 25 minutes of getting a sense of how such a workshop can um, foster the bonds, spark meaningful conversation,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
as you said, strengthen the commitment, add the emotional parts that might not be unlocked yet or not visible yet, bring them out, make them discover. And that's then the workshop. But you mentioned so many things, and we should definitely use the rest of this episode to talk a little bit about backgrounds, what to do with remote teams, but also the Lego Serious Play market, whatever that means, books and magazines and websites and certifications out there. So you mentioned a few things already where it came from. Could you maybe spend 2 minutes or 3 on the origins of the method and maybe also your role in that?
2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. Not going back
No,
all
I'm
the
happy
way
to. No. It especially. No, it's important. I mean,
Yes.
so let's put it like this. Serious Play started as an idea. Who got the idea first is hard to say, but an idea emerged in the head of the Lego owner, right? An idea about unleashing potential, right? An idea that, or a need maybe, but he had the idea that people have an unlocked potential, and that's also a belief, right? He had an idea or a dream of more imaginative strategies. He's a great believer in the Lego break. The man is so value driven. So there was this idea about making strategies different.
Okay.
There was then 2 professors at IMD, right, where Lego has lots of connections, who also had this idea of crafting strategies and this idea about maybe the Lego brick can work for this. And it was sort of the meeting between those 3 that sparked the initial idea of Serious Play, which, frankly speaking, I'm going to whisper this, right, didn't work in the beginning, right? So it didn't work in the beginning, but the idea was there. And
right.
And I think these guys, they sense, when this is not working right now, it's not because it's never going to work. It's just because we haven't cracked the code, right? Their first airplanes really didn't get up and started flying, right? So there wasn't the idea. It was the putting the idea to work, right? Let's put it that way. So what happened then was that they involved Robert, who I know you also met, Julian, Robert Rasmussen,
Yes.
who has a background in learning and development and came from the R&D of the educational products. And Robert knows and knew a lot about, how children, but people learn, right? How do we create knowledge? And so he was good at putting structure let's just call it structure. It's not the right word, but to this. And Robert got involved, and it started to take shape, really, right? And this is probably, we're getting into 2001, and that's when I personally joined.
Okay.
So I came from the mothership, from Lego. I have a background as a sort of management consultant, and I did business school, and I can do a 2x2 matrix all by myself, so I'm very good. Yeah, I know. Thank you. And I just, when you work for Lego, unless you really have no sort of natural curiosity, it's impossible not to start getting curious about learning and development, the brain and play, right? So I think that I got infected by that bug as well, and I came across this, and it just really, really, for me, matches perfectly my belief about what strategy is. Remember, this was really a strategy tool back then.
Okay,
what strategy is, how it works, etc. So I joined that team in 2001 and joined with Robert, and you can say that became the facilitator training. We put some flesh on the bones, and in pharmaceutical terminology, we started moving from the research phase to the development phase, and actually having something, if that works as a metaphor here, right? That starts to work. We did the first official facilitator training in September 2001.
All right. And then between that, between the training and crafting and further developing and
where we are now,
prototyping, right? I mean, the method, and I'm probably just going to link a few websites and documents, of course, has principles, core steps, philosophy, and it's all written down, and it can be seen.
Maybe Julian, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Maybe really quick, the story is, we were an independent company from Lego, owned by the owner of Lego, and
Okay.
controlled by him, basically, you can say. And we worked as a really independent company for a while, to get out of that Lego system, because we were so different, right? And then we were merged into Lego.
Okay.
And I, as the only one from the startup, I continued inside Lego, and we were inside Lego for a while, and we experimented with different business models. I left Lego because I thought I had something else I needed to. I had an itch I needed to scratch, and it was the wrong itch. But that's a different story.
Right.
Maybe a different podcast. So you can tell things you did you shouldn't have done. Podcast. Invite me for that. Right. And then things happened inside Lego, and Lego at some point said, the entire initial team of Serious Play with me and others, we were no longer there. So they kind of said, let's change the business model.
Okay.
And then they did this thing that they initially called open source. They quickly tried to change it into a community model where they focused on selling the bricks. They called it open source, and they published a document called open source. So that label has kind of stayed with them. This was around 2010, and since then, lots of things have happened. Just to
and that's interesting, because you
have it there.
That I will link in the podcast.
Yeah, and it's not. Be a little bit careful. Lego has actually discontinued the document a little bit.
Okay.
So there are things in it that are not so precise.
Right. I mean, again, there's lots to read about the process, facilitators, code of conduct, and again, we need to keep in mind when this document was published, and the speed why it was called open source,
and the speed with which it happened. I think it also matters actually a little bit.
Yeah, and also, I mean, now it's under a Creative Commons deed.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it. Yeah. So how does that work, by the way? I mean, I've seen online like LSP 1.0. I mean, is there an LSP 2.0, 3.0? And how does it work now with the things that are developed or that were developed after Lego discontinued? And you have founded somewhere after 2001 the association. How does that work?
So let's take all these numbers, which I think it's fair to say I prefer to focus on this notion of the LSP 1.0 as let's say that there is that, and with that, let's say that it's the thing that Lego made open source in 2010, I believe, and the stuff that's in that document, right, which is very relatively simple. You have a 3-step process, right, and it's really about question and building and sharing, and that at its core is that's what Lego Serious Play is and was, and it is the document also gives some examples for some workshops, and this is sort of it. This is what was there when we left, and what they said, what we actually also tried to trademark at some point back in the ED on behalf of Lego, or owned by Lego, but so that's that one. And that's open. Anyone can do it, just like coaching, right?
Yeah. Well, I would like to add, easy to understand, and you can read the document, hard to master, right?
And that's why coaching is a great example, right? You can call your coach. I can call myself a coach. My sons, 14 and 17, they can call themselves a coach, right? I'm a coach. I ask questions. And there, everybody agrees that coaching is asking a question, someone answering you, and then you work from there, right? And as an analogy, that's also Serious Play. Right. There is this thing about asking a question, someone building an answer in Lego bricks, and then that answer is shared, right? So there's that. After that, you can then say, and Lego then decided that's what we're going to say it is, and then we're going to sell materials that can be used for it. Because, hey, we're a toy company. Right? So then, in the beginning, they actually tried to make a little bit of a board for it as well, just to, but that got discontinued fast. So after that, well, that was a quiet period, but Robert and I, Robert Rasmussen and I, when we had our different companies, and we also had a long story, And we had been the trainers on behalf when we were employed by Lego. Even when we were not employed by Lego, Lego was still insourcing us to deliver trainings on behalf of them. So it's like if someone says they were trained by Lego, it means they were trained by Robert or me, right? Anyway, so I think we were sitting there in each our house and sort of, and we both knew that we were going to continue training people in serious play, which was perfectly legal. And this was what we'd been doing, and this is what we believed in. And I don't even remember who made the call, but I think we both had this feeling. I know he's going to do it. He knows I'm going to do it. So instead of developing our own material alone, why don't we form something, develop it, and then actually compete on the market?
Yeah.
So we did. And so we then developed, based on what was there, right? And sort of starting point, whatever. Again, think coaching, right? We then developed our things with serious play. Like, and started to train people in this. We developed our own manual. We did some work on the core process. We developed some application techniques and something that Robert had already been toyed with when he was independent, in his Rasmussen consulting company. We furthered that. And we then took this, let's call it IP, and we put it into this association.
Right.
Which you can think of as a guild.
Okay.
The purpose of the association is not to make money. It's to uphold the quality of Lego serious play, basically.
Okay. Yeah.
So everything that we develop, we put into this one. So a member, in the beginning, it was just me and Robert, right? Now we are more trainers around the world. All trainers they deliver the facilitator training program with the same roadmap, the same material, same everything, right? And then we form a community around that. Okay. And the association doesn't make any money. It's not a commercial activity. The trainer has to pay a fee to it, but no royalties. So it is really this guild which is there to protect the quality. So that's what we did. And then shortly after, other trainers emerged, right? Some of them were strongly anchored in the 1.0, let's call it 1.0, right? Some of them were strongly anchored in the 1.0 past. Some were even trained, or at least one was even trained by me and Robert as a trainer. So super competent person who just chose a different path. Super competent person who chose a different path.
All right. So now we understand or got a sense of the association, and we got to know each other 2013. Again, that's
pre-corona.
Unbelievable. I mean, and I was trained, by both of you, right? I remember in December. You still do that in December, like a training?
Yes, we do.
Where you, great. Yeah,
so maybe just a note on that one. So Robert and I do one training a year just to, we speak a lot, but being in the room together is a different thing. So we align, except for 2020.
There you go.
Where we couldn't be that many in the room. So I did the session alone with a smaller group. It was so sad.
Okay, all right. So I, of course, went to additional trainings that you all offer on the business model canvas, and you do now see things emerging around design thinking. But what happened roughly, I mean, between 2013 when I was trained and today? Is that something that you could just elaborate on shortly? Any other application techniques, any other crossovers, or where's this journey going?
So that, all right. Shortly. So it's a question. So where is serious play going as a method is a question we sometimes get at. And in one answer is that it's not going anywhere. And that way it's like gravity. We are not changing gravity. We're just understanding gravity better, and we're starting to realize how to use gravity. So sometimes I kind of like the metaphor that serious play was never developed. It's being discovered. So we always get to understand the serious play method better and better and better. So your training, if you came to it today, and if you did it today, when doors open up again,
Mm-hmm.
you would recognize so much of it, but it would also be so different.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing a lot of the same things. We're just doing them better because we've
Yeah.
discovered more about serious play.
Okay.
We discover. I mean, some of it is theory that's coming up that we can start seeing. That's what's happening in the brain where we're asking the question. So I should ask it that way. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
are pure, let's say, practice. We're realizing how actions. So actions impact behavior and how we create these spaces and how we articulate the questions better. So there's a discovery going on, right?
Right.
So that's one thing. The other part of your question, I think, was the new applications of serious play.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff happening.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So when people have done the training like you have, they can develop their own workshops. Absolutely, right? So there's a million things happening that we don't know anything about, right? Um, but there are also more trainings in where we have developed a roadmap and we train people in using this particular roadmap. And the trainers are offering a pretty broad spectrum of these. I have, when there have been windows in the corona pandemic, been offering actually a training that's developed on based on something we did years ago, which we call the Beast Workshop, where we really dive in and we work on complex issues and we play a lot of emergence. So, and I know you know what this means, but if our listeners can go back to imagining that big table with all these models, we
Right.
play future events and we see how the landscape respond to this. We even play out decisions. So what if I lowered my prices? And we see how the landscape respond to this. All of this in order to make better strategies and being better able at handling the unforeseen, which when we right now we're sensing the demand from our clients to do this, they just can't get into the room. So we're really doing a lot of this as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, again, there's only so much we can cover in an hour, right? But of course,
Yeah.
applications in that are based on then the landscape
Yeah.
that a group and that a team has built, understood, agreed on, committed to. And then, as you mentioned, okay, playing out future scenarios, playing out possible decisions, and by that, preparing yourself for that scenario. And yeah, also very, very, very powerful part of the process.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
look, the question that I get. Where can I be trained? How can someone and that might maybe it's going to extend that question not only to be an own trainer, because not everyone is a facilitator who's listening to the podcast. What if you hire someone to do and use the Lego Series Play method and materials for the question at hand? How can they make sure that they receive quality and not only Lego bricks in the room? Is there a quick answer to that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
I
Okay.
know.
Now, obviously, I think that trainers from us are the best and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But that's almost too simple, right? So here's what I would if so again, you asked two questions, I think. So if someone was gonna go out and be trained as a facilitator first,
Yes.
and I think, sorry, I'm just thinking this through. If I was to be trained as a facilitator today, I think I would check into the what's the background of my trainer. Where how did they get into Lego Series Play? Frankly, I mean, and there's some really good. I mean, I'm immensely proud of the work we do in the association, but there are other really good providers of facilitator training out there in Series Play. But there are also people who might have come into this a little bit because, hey, this feels like a hype. So I think I'll check in with that. I do also. I'm a great believer in actual client experience. So it is coming, when I went to business school, I like my teachers to have a deep understanding of the theory, but I really like the ones who had also been a manager.
Yes.
So I would also look into that. I would look for that the trainer as client experience. And with that, I don't mean that they've trained a facilitator inside a company. I mean that they delivered workshops inside a company, helping with developing a new business model. I think these were the things I would be looking for. I would also maybe look for that the trainer doesn't promise you an easy, quick fix.
Yeah.
Because serious play is not. It looks so easy, but it's not, right? So maybe that. I mean, don't look for quick fix. Check in where the trainer comes from, what's their background, how did they get into this, and have they done client delivery, right? These are the things. So yeah, if I was hiring a facilitator, well, I would sort of almost do the same thing, I guess. I would check in that my facilitator had done a facilitator training, not just read a book on this. And I would really, again, and then check in with what is this facilitator training? Have you done a 3-hour Zoom conversation with someone and now you think you can do serious play? Or have you done something a little bit more in depth? Right. Because you said it a few times, Julian, I think this notion of sometimes it's like serious play is just having Lego bricks and asking questions, but that's not that's not what it is, right? There is all these let's say theories behind it about how to build up these questions, how to ask the right question, how to create the safe space, how to actually create that 100, right?
Yeah, and I would love to share, things that we discussed before we started the recording, right? That once then this, or as you mentioned in your example, right? Once then this dynamic, this conversations, this mutual exchange or authentic exchange, emotional exchange is going on, right? Then you as a facilitator really need to be present, observe, know your game and what to do, and not everything that, well, I can just speak for myself. What I do then in the room, even if I use the Lego Serious Play method and material, is then Lego Serious Play, right? Because sometimes you need to mediate. Sometimes you need to, do something different to spark an idea. Sometimes you just need to, drop all your plans and ask another question, a deepening question, or something emerges and that you have not had on your radar, and then you need to react on that. And then you go like, oh my God, it's going to take me another hour or two. How are we going to make sure that, we get a good insight and flow of the workshop? So that is something, firsthand experience. I totally agree.
Exactly. There's just something there. And then an analogy that at least I tend to like is a little bit with a brush, right? And calligraphy. That you have a brush does mean you can do calligraphy. But you can't do calligraphy without a brush.
Okay. Yeah.
So Lego bricks doesn't make it Lego Serious Play, but it's hard to do serious play, impossible to do serious play without Lego bricks. And it's really this notion of knowing what to do with the tool. So the brick is essential, but it doesn't make it. The brush is essential for the calligraphy, but it doesn't make it calligraphy that you're holding a brush.
Wow, Per, so much. I have 2 more questions. I'm trying to really, looking at the clock right now.
Yeah, it's ticking, right? Yeah.
I'll do a second episode on Legacy.
It's a good thing that people are in lockdown and have all this time at home, right? What else would they be doing?
Listen, we could just go on for hours. Look, remote teams. Again, there have been remote teams before the pandemic, but of course now lots of everything has not only changed, but also moved to virtual or online learning environments. So what do you think? Is that a good thing? Is that working? Are we losing too much of the core, of the DNA, of the essence of the method? Or is it just, another great way of speaking the language?
So if we had a choice, you and me, when it comes to doing this podcast, we would have preferred to sit across the table from each other.
Yeah, and have a coffee.
Right? But this works because this is the option we have now.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, there's an element of this in this situation we are in now, right?
Mm.
The technology enables us to do things we wouldn't otherwise be able to do in this lockdown period. There are definitely limits to the technology.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I actually think when it comes to serious play that from a technology perspective,
Mm-hmm.
there's probably a lot of things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that it has the full impact that it
Mm-hmm.
would have if we were in that room together and we could literally be building together and then we're touching the bricks and I could move your brick over in the corner of the shared model.
Mm-hmm.
And that. So I think parts my and I want to take my take on this, right? And we could probably have 5 facilitators in here and have a very intense and very different kind of
Absolutely.
conversation going on. I'm like this. There are certainly parts of serious play that works in remote facilitation.
Mm.
My perspective is that when I do my remote sessions, I would rather do less and then do it better.
Mm-hmm.
My take on it is also I'm very what I would call reactive to this. I
Mm-hmm.
when my clients have a need right now
Mm-hmm.
where they would benefit more from doing Lego serious play than not, so to speak, then
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather do it.
Yeah.
In practice, what's happening right now with my client work is that the real tough nuts where they know they need to be in the room,
Mm-hmm.
they can't do it right now. But they benefit from opening the conversations also using Lego serious play so that
Mm-hmm.
they're building up the conversation. So we have typically shorter remote sessions
Mm-hmm.
right now where the team or parts of the team are coming together and they're starting their diagnostics. They're starting their building and they're sharing and they're learning. But the real tough stuff they are pushing out. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's my take on it, right?
Yeah.
I always use the Plato's cave, right? You know, if you've only seen the shadows on the wall, you think
Mm.
that's reality until you turn around and you see the people outside the cave.
Yeah.
And that's the risk a little bit here, I think.
Mm. Yeah, and again, I think this is true for lots of serious games out there,
Yeah.
activities, interactions. Of course, we all went through this. Oh, great, we're just gonna convert this into a
Yes.
Zoom experience, right? And then we realize, okay, maybe there are different parts. And then, as you mentioned, you know, the question is then, what would we do if this would be, let's say, the new normal? Would we then convert something, or would we just create something completely new? Always focusing on the goal, and
Yeah.
that brings me, of
Yeah.
course, to the notion that, and again, true for all the serious games out there. We don't play because we want to play, or we don't do Lego Serious Play because we want to do Lego Serious Play, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to help facilitate, start a
Yeah.
conversation, the buy-in, the commitment. We want to get this unknown out there, and that's when you then choose to use method XYZ or then the process XYZ,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Wow. Final question, Per. What is your ultimate facilitation tip for all our listeners? Not only for Lego Serious Play, but maybe specifically for Lego Serious Play. Do you have one tip? If you just could, say one thing, what would it be? I'm just gonna
I
leave
think that was it.
silence in. Yeah.
Be quiet. Always
Yeah.
be
There you
quiet.
go. There you go.
No, yeah, I really think it's hard.
I know.
But I think there is something about silence.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that's helped me a little bit. I don't know if it's a facilitation technique, but I think this notion of when you meet someone, you know you can learn something from that person.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone you meet, no matter what, there's a learning in them that you would benefit from. I think sometimes that helps me as a facilitator as well.
Okay.
And then quieting my own voice and
Very
who I'm
cool.
thinking. That's a hard one. Let's do another
I
podcast on
know,
that.
I know, I know. But I ask this every, every facilitator that I'm interviewing. So at the end of the decade will have lots of answers to that question.
Yeah. Yeah. So sorry, I keep circling my mind. So there's silence. There's suspending my own knowledge about the topic, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Silence, suspension, curiosity.
Silence, suspension, and curiosity. Thank you so much, Pierre. It was great chatting with you about Lego.
I'm gonna call you back with the answer I really want to give on that one.
Yeah, please do. And it's incredible that I, throughout this 1 year now of the Serious Games podcast, I didn't have a episode on Lego Serious Play out yet. We've changed that. Thank you so much. Happy to have you back for maybe another deep dive in some sort of a technique or something completely different, or only focusing on first-hand experience. Well, we'll just have a look. Till then, thank you, Per, and to all our listeners, please share your feedback. And I might just say that right now, and we'll work our way around that. If you do feel that we've missed some question that you have, or if you want to ask some questions, maybe for our next episode or so, just write me an email. Leave your feedback on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and co. All right. Bye-bye from Berlin.
Bye, guys. Stay safe.
You can reach us at hello@keylearning.net. We're looking forward to your suggestions, comments, and feedback.